Putin had sent draft treaties to Washington and to Brussels in the middle of December 2021. Instead of engaging in talks, Biden said, no, Ukraine has every right. United States under Biden refused to engage in proper, normal diplomacy with Putin's Russia. And Putin had good reason to do what he did, because if he had not done that, there will be a NATO naval base in Crimea. You see, too close. Let's understand Zelensky. He is a comedian, very popular, has wide popular support, who has scripted a tragedy for his country. He will resign if his country gets NATO membership. Nobody is taking it seriously. NATO doesn't want to give membership to Ukraine. Why? Because that will mean direct military confrontation with Russia. It's like this. Neither Trump nor Putin will do anything to unseat Zelensky. But there are internal forces within Ukraine. I don't think India has any substantive role to play in this, because the big powers are talking, meaning Moscow and Washington, and soon Zelensky also will be included, and then London, Paris, and Germany and others. If this war is not stopped now, which President Trump is trying to do very wisely, I admire him for that. If it is not stopped now, it will go on, and more Ukrainians and Russians will be killed, and Ukraine will lose more territory.
February 2022, the day Russian President Vladimir Putin announced what he called a special military operation in Ukraine.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Ее цель – защита людей, которые на протяжении 8 лет подвергаются издевательствам, геноциду со стороны киевского режима. Кто бы ни пытался помешать нам, а тем более создать угрозы для нашей страны, для нашего народа, должны знать, что ответ России будет незамедлительным и приведет вас к таким последствиям.
Russia had invaded Ukraine, and that marked the start of a deadly conflict, arguably the deadliest in the 21st century. Roughly 1 million Ukrainians and Russians have been killed or wounded in this war. Now, as is the case with every war, this one too had multiple phases. One of aggression, where Russian forces captured large parts of Ukrainian territory, some of which they still hold. The next one, where Ukraine fought back valiantly with Europe and American support to regain lost ground. Then came the phase where no side gained ground and things stand as is. So as the war completes 3 years, where do things stand currently, both on the battlefield and on the negotiating table? Can Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky agree for a truce? What role will US President Donald Trump play in this conflict? After all, Trump is giving all the signals that the United States of America and their support for Ukraine won't continue the way it did under his predecessor, Joe Biden, much to the dismay of both Kiev and its European allies. Today, we spoke to former diplomat KP Fabian to try and get some perspective on this issue. So do watch this interview till the end. It promises to be a very insightful one. So let's begin.
So thank you so much for taking out the time and speaking with us. Last time when we spoke about Israel, Gaza, and all that is happening on that front. Today, let's talk about Russia, Ukraine. On the 24th of February, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that he's undertaking a special military operation, and Russian forces marched into Ukraine. And the number that I have in front of me, that on last count, more than 174,000 people have been killed during the 3 years this war. An estimated 10 million people have been displaced. They have fled out of their homes within Ukraine and abroad. And as of December 2024, Russia controls approximately 18.5% of Ukrainian territory. That's about more than 111,000 square kilometers in total. So, for starters, what is your assessment of the 3 years that have gone by in the Russia-Ukraine war. What is your assessment? How do you look at what has happened since the 24th of February 2022?
Thank you. You have raised important questions. The first point I want to make is that the Western media and their followers in India have got it wrong. It is true, historically true, that on the 24th of February 2022, President Putin sent in his military into Ukraine. That's correct. But, students of international relations, we have to ask, we have to dig deeper. Why did he do that? I am not suggesting that what he did is right. All that I am suggesting is that we should look at the big picture and we should dig deeper. Now, he did it because President Zelensky of Ukraine was asking for NATO membership. And President Biden was encouraging him, saying that Ukraine has every right to have its own defense policy and seek NATO membership. And the second part of what Biden said is that NATO has every right to keep an open door policy. Now, we have to put this in the historical context. When Soviet Union under Gorbachev agreed to the reunification of East and West Germany, at that time, Americans had pledged to Gorbachev that not an inch outside Germany, NATO forces will be, deployed. In fact, it was said that even in East Germany, they won't be deployed. You see? Okay. Then they went on expanding, and at that time, Russia was weak. But in 2007, Bucharest summit, America wanted to take in Georgia and Ukraine, London and Paris, and Germany too, Bonn too, disagreed. They said this will upset Russia and it's not good for European security. So they found a wishy-washy formula. Georgia and Ukraine will enter NATO eventually, without a deadline. Now, that is 2008. Now, just go back 1 year. 2007, Munich Security Conference. Putin said, there is no question of further NATO expansion. So that is the background. And then what happened? There was a revolution in 2014 in Ukraine, a revolution that was, well, of course it had popular support, but in a historical sense, it was supported and even propped up by America, because I remember that the American Assistant Secretary of State for Europe, her name will come back to me, she was sort of demonstrating. And there were conversations between her and others which have come out. Okay. And then Yanukovych, well, who was close to Russia, he ran away. And then, it started. And at that time, Putin realized that he had to do something about Crimea. Now, Crimea, as you know, they have Russian Navy, Imperial Russian Navy, not only Soviet, not only Russian, had a warm seaport. You know what I mean? And that, dates back to 1784, under Catherine the Great. And mind you, 1784 is precisely the year America was born. England recognized the United States of America under the Treaty of Paris in 1784. So, to cut the story short, retaining access to Sevastopol port for the Russian Navy is a matter of national security. Now go back to 1962. Recall the Cuban Missile Crisis? Khrushchev deployed missiles into Cuba And what did Kennedy say? He didn't say that Cuba has every right to have its own defense policy. Kennedy said, remove them. And the big difference between that generation of leaders in 1962 and the current generation is that Khrushchev and Kennedy resorted to classical diplomacy and resolved it. Whereas Biden rejected classical diplomacy because Putin had sent draft treaties to Washington and to Brussels in the middle of December 2021. Instead of engaging in talks, Biden said, no, Ukraine has every right. So that is what happened. This is the bigger picture.
So you're saying Biden sort of egged on Zelensky to not take the conventional diplomacy path, as you say, drawing a parallel with the Cuban Missile Crisis. That is what you think essentially happened.
No, Biden refused to talk to Putin. I mean, Biden meaning he could have sent his foreign minister. That is not the point at what level. But United States under Biden refused to engage in proper normal diplomacy with Putin's Russia. And Putin had good reason to do what he did, because if he had not done that, there will be a NATO naval base in Crimea. You see, too close. And then, even without, at some point, even without Ukraine's joining NATO, America and Ukraine had signed a partnership charter for security in November 2021 and another similar treaty in December 2021, where it was said that America will help Ukraine to recover Crimea. So Putin had every reason to believe that with or without Ukraine entering NATO, Americans were going to come to Ukraine in a big way, same as 1962. So Putin acted in the interest of national security.
Right. I want to come to the article that was written by you and it was published on Press Insider. I'll come to what you've written on. But first, I want to know your thoughts on what Ukrainian President Zelensky said on Sunday. He said that he would be willing to give up his presidency in exchange for peace ahead of course, the third anniversary. What he said, I'm quoting, if to achieve peace, you really need to give up my post, I am ready. I can trade it for NATO membership if there are such conditions. Now, you're the president we're talking about, sir, who's been at the helm of his country for these 3 years. He was elected back in 2019. He's still stuck around, been at the forefront. We've seen him over the last 3 years, going to the battlefield, speaking to soldiers, trying to encourage, boost their morale. How do you see this statement in the context of what has happened in this long-drawn war between Russia and Ukraine?
One or 2 points. First of all, let's understand Zelensky. He is a comedian, very popular, has wide popular support, who has scripted a tragedy for his country. Because you mentioned a certain number about the number of people killed. But Wall Street Journal had, in September last year, 2024, come out with a different figure, which I think I mentioned in my article. It said that 1 million human beings, forget about whether they are Ukrainians or Russians, as you know, between us, when we go to the next world, do we take the passport with us? So 1 million human beings have either been killed or seriously injured during this war. So that is a terrible thing. That is why I said this comedian had scripted a tragedy for his country. Now, as to his offer that he will resign if his country gets NATO membership, nobody is taking it seriously. NATO doesn't want to give membership to Ukraine. Why? Because that will mean direct military confrontation with Russia. And let's again understand, despite all the help which NATO has given, and you can compare the GDP of NATO and the GDP of Russia. You can compare the defense expenditure of NATO and the defense expenditure of Russia. It's about 10, 11 times the NATO. Despite all that, my view, is that Russia has a local military advantage in that part of the world. And unless NATO is prepared to send boots to the ground, which it is not prepared, Russia will gain. And if this war is not stopped now, which President Trump is trying to do very wisely, I admire him for that. If it is not stopped now, it will go on, and more Ukrainians and Russians will be killed, and Ukraine will lose more territory. To what benefit?
Right. Now let's come to the article that you wrote that was published by the Press Insider. For the viewers, we'll play that article on the screen. But I want to, and the title of this article is the end of the Russia-Ukraine war finally near? And the one line I think that sort of caught my attention was this. Putin and Trump are likely to meet soon to agree on the broad contours of a treaty. And it is possible that there might be a successor to Zelensky before that treaty is signed. Will you elaborate on that? So what do you mean when do you think Zelensky's successor? Who will pick Zelensky's successor? What happens to Zelensky? And of course, the first half of it, when you speak about the broad contours of a treaty between that could be taken up in the meeting between Trump and Putin.
No, it's like this. Neither Trump nor Putin will do anything to unseat Zelensky. But there are internal forces within Ukraine. And if you may recall that he recently replaced his army commander. And he has been replacing others also. And what is happening is that many people in Ukraine have realized that this is a war which they cannot win. And its continuation will give them only more suffering, more misery. And do you know that the Ukrainian army is getting depleted? Some are running away, and the youngsters who are asked to be enlisted, they don't want to. And the Ukrainian security agencies have been going to cafes and other places and catch hold of youngsters. So there is no question but Ukraine's suffering further loss of territory and further casualties, whether Zelensky remains or not. Now, I believe there is a certain dissatisfaction with him, so something might happen. I don't think he would be happy to sign on the ceasefire agreement, because let's face it, he will have to sign on the dotted line. The big two will agree on something, and he will have to sign. And there are other problems, he wants a peacekeeping force, which, as you know, Starmer has said that he would send, provided there is American guarantee. The whole thing is ridiculous. I mean, did you know that, you must have read my article, Starmer has signed a 1,000-year treaty with Ukraine. This reminds me of the 1,000-year Reich of Germany. We are all human beings. We have 70, 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, maybe 100 years. To sign a treaty for 1,000 years? And don't forget, Lord Palmerston, what did he say? England has no permanent friends or enemies. Only its interests are permanent. So they are also going a while. There is a softening of the head and hardening of the heart.
But that's what my basic question. It boils down to then who will really bring this war to an end. There are some reports that come. There are phases in the war where there is a stalemate. No one is really making any gains. Things are as it is on the battlefield. Now, help us understand this dynamics with Trump coming in. He called Zelensky the other day a dictator. I think just last night when he was asked about it, he said, I'm not sure if I did actually say it. And we're also seeing at the UN, the United States sided with Russia on a resolution on this war. Who can really bring this 3-year-old war to an end? Will it be Trump? Will it be Putin? And how is it? And if that is the case, how will it be possible without having Ukraine on the table, without having Zelensky on the table? Because their side is pretty clear that you cannot decide the fate of Ukraine without having Ukraine on the table. So, what do you expect going further? How do you see this playing out with especially the cracks between US, the European allies and Zelensky, which wasn't the case when Biden was around. And then, of course, the whole point of when or who will bring this war to an end.
See, it's like this. European media, Western media have been going to town saying that how can you have a ceasefire agreement without Ukraine there? Now, let's understand what Trump is trying to do. As I have said in the article, he is trying to agree with Putin on the broad contours of the agreement. And after that, both Ukraine and Europeans will be included in a conference. If he had done it the other way around, namely, if Trump had invited Zelensky and the Europeans to the first meeting in Riyadh, then what would have happened? Zelensky would have demanded withdrawal of Russia from all Ukrainian territories, okay? And Putin would have said, niet, 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 no, no, no. And the conference collapses. You see, that is one part of the big picture. The second part is, since America is not going to give further military assistance to Ukraine, Europe also, despite all their brave talk, they will also, even if they give now, it will taper down. Because, don't forget, the European supporters of Ukraine and America and Canada, they have been giving away almost all that they have by way of storage. They don't have it now. You see, this was pointed out by Merzheimer, Professor Merzheimer also, many a time. They don't have it. So in other words, militarily speaking, Russia is gaining not only ground, but Russia is destroying Ukraine. Its power and other infrastructure. The World Bank has said that you will need $456 billion to rebuild Ukraine. Now, who is going to pay? Tell me. So, Ukraine is getting destroyed. You see? So, it is in Ukraine's interest to have the ceasefire, not tomorrow, but yesterday.
Right. Very interesting point there. So let's now, in conclusion, I want to focus on India a bit, because India has been, from the very beginning, it has been very clear in its stance of peace. There must be dialogue, there must be peace. And of course, famously, Prime Minister Modi had told President Putin, Russian President Putin, that this is not a need of war. And since then, a lot of experts have discussed, debated, and analyzed the fact that India could potentially be the peacemaker because it has good relations with Russia. It also has good equations with Ukraine. So India, compared to some of the other countries in the world, is in a better position to act as some sort of a peacemaker. With the war now completing 3 years, what do you expect India's role to be as we go forward, given the dynamics that are already playing out with Trump and all that is happening on one side? Where do you see and how do you see India's role in this war, sir?
Well, I am afraid that the Indian media have been doing much speculation, and the argument that India might have a role doesn't hold much water. I remember a news agency, let me not name them, but they did publish it, asking me, Trump spoke to Zelensky the day our Prime Minister landed in Washington. So don't you think that, Modi and Trump will talk something on Ukraine and agree to work together? So I said, very unlikely. And that is what happened. Trump and Modi did not discuss Ukraine. And, now, if there were, we don't know, if there were a larger conference, that is not only United States, Russia, Ukraine, Europeans, and others, say, including China, because, Putin might like to bring in China, then Putin might invite both Brazil and India. You know what I mean? But India will be a not very prominent partner or interlocutor there. India will be there. And I suppose our diplomats can help with drafting. We are good at drafting, you know what I mean. But I don't think India has any substantive role to play in this because the big powers are talking, I mean Moscow and Washington, and soon Zelensky also will be included, and then London, Paris, and Germany and others.
So then in conclusion, sir, the title of your article, I want to ask you that is the end of the Russia-Ukraine war finally here? Do you expect that this 3-year conflict that has dragged on so many lives lost? Of course, like you pointed out, the estimates of those who died, it varies. But do you see on an optimistic note, this conflict, this 3-year-old conflict coming to an end then?
I take it will end, but I was just listening to Trump. He said either it will end very soon or it will continue. Again, that is his way of talking. He's telling the rest of the world, help me to end it now. Otherwise, I will abandon my efforts. Because after signing the minerals deal, he might pretend that he is no longer interested. In which case, the war will continue to Ukraine's cost and to Europe's humiliation and confusion and disarray. And don't forget, there is a new German government coming up, and Germany will stop aiding Ukraine. And if Germany stops, others will fall in line, despite all the brave talk of Paris and London.
Okay, we'll see how that plays out. Very interesting dynamics since, of course, Trump came in, and now, like you rightly pointed out, we'll have a new government in Germany as well. So we'll wait and watch how this plays out. So thank you so much for taking out the time.
Thank you. Nice talking to you, and through you to the hundreds of thousands of your listeners. Do put out the Press Insider article. Thank you.
Stay ahead with our cutting-edge news app. Instantly access the latest shorts in just 1 minute and breaking news in just 50 words. Download now for a smarter, faster news experience.